Hello and welcome to the SME Focus show powered by MTDCNC. I'm Mark Weymouth from the Sensor Specialist Plus Automation. On this week's show, we aim to highlight aspects of interest to UK manufacturing or topics of particular interest to SMEs. Therefore, my guest today is Poggy Murray Whitham, Operations Manager at EqualEngineers, a consultant offering advice on diversity, equity and inclusion. Poggy is also a factory automation sensor specialist and now a published author. For those viewers who know me, you might be scared to think that this episode will be an excuse to talk in detail about sensors in excruciating detail, but I can assure you we will not talk about sensors in any technical detail. Hi, Poggy. Welcome to SME Focus.
Thank you very much for having me.
And you promise we're not going to talk about sensors in any
We can talk
excruciating
a little
detail?
bit about them.
Okay. Maybe we won't inflict that on a wider audience. Let's see. I'm going to kick off by browsing your LinkedIn profile and say that you
Sure.
graduated with a degree in aerospace engineering in 2012 from Liverpool Uni. You spent a year teaching English in Cambodia and Chile.
Yeah.
Cambodia is particularly interesting to me as I'm just about to go there, so it seems quite topical. And you
It's an
spent a
amazing
year
country.
working. Oh, brilliant. You spent a year working in engineering recruitment. We're going to gloss over that. And you entered the high life, the God's own profession of automation sensors in March 2015. In each episode, I tend to pick a point in the guest's life and attach a musical reference point to it. And obviously, sensors is important to me. So I'm going to pick that as the highlight to start with and say that in March 2015, we had Sam Smith at #1 featuring John Legend with Lay Me Down for probably many, many weeks. So that's a little earworm for people to take away. Talking March 2015. So you spent, I think, over 5 years in total. You started 5 years working for the sensor manufacturer IFM. So can I kick off by asking what first attracted you to factory automation and why the switch from aerospace engineering?
Yeah, it was 5 years in a day, exactly.
Why?
And the engineering recruitment part is actually quite relevant here because
Okay.
basically, after I ran out of money and came back to the UK to get a proper job, I was always better at the commercial and projects side of engineering than necessarily wanting to go into excruciating detail on the technical side of things. So the engineering recruitment job served two purposes. One was to basically have a crash course in sales, which I will maintain to this day. It was the hardest form of sales that I ever did.
Yeah.
But I specialized in engineering control and instrumentation recruitments within the engineering sector. So I
Okay.
used it basically to scope out which area of engineering I wanted to go into, and then used it as a platform to get myself into IFM essentially. Um, so it was a year spent into looking into different scenarios, different parts of the industry. When I did aerospace engineering, as people think aerospace engineering is a very, very specific discipline of engineering, but it's so broad because it involves so many different things. The course that I did was triple accredited at the time. It was the only triple accredited course of its kind. So it was accredited by what was the IEEE, which is now the IET,
Yeah.
the IMECI, and the RAES. But it was
Okay.
always the automation and the control system side of things that interested me more than some of the others. So that's really what drew me to the world of automation. But when I went into automation, it wasn't necessarily factory automation. So I specialized in mobile automation, in the automation of mobile plant machinery. So working with
Yeah.
construction, mining, agriculture, forestry type machinery, basically anything that moves that wasn't a car. So although most of the companies that I worked for specialized in factory automation, I was in a much more niche area of automation.
Yeah. Understood. Okay. So after 5 years in a day, so that's an easy one to remember on the LinkedIn profile, you move from IFM to a more of a team leadership and a senior management role with another sensor manufacturer, Turk Banner.
Mhm.
And interestingly, your maybe points to what we're going to talk about later, but your LinkedIn profile actually mentions diversity and inclusion and diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging within the profile. So, can I ask you
Mhm.
how this came about? Was it a formal part of your job? Is it something you developed? Tell us a little bit more about that.
So it wasn't necessarily a formal part of the job. The job that I had was a divisional manager for systems engineering at Banner. So I managed a division of the business in the UK, and it was turnkey solutions. So it was everything from, designing the system, as I already had been doing for a number of years, but then the integration of that within the customer's architecture. As part of that, there was a certain number of different things that we had to do. Safe contractor approval was one of them, and within that there were certain requirements that the company had to have. One of them was different policies, and the company at the tech brand in the UK at the time didn't have a DEI policy, which I then wrote.
Yeah.
At the same time, I was also doing a master's degree with Arden University in engineering management that I started back in 2018. And I was just coming in around 2020. In around 2020, I was deciding what I wanted to do for my dissertation, which I did on LGBTQ plus specific diversity and inclusion within the UK automation and electrical engineering sector, which sounds really specific, but it was I bit off way more than I could chew with that. And so because of that, I then joined Inter Engineering, which I now co-chair. And so I was doing, engineering and DEI work in parallel, really. And it was the first point, really, where they started, where those two parallels that I'd done, because I got involved in diversity, equity, and inclusion work when I was at university back in 2008, 2009. So I've been doing it for a long time, but it was always in parallel with my engineering career. So that was the first point that they started to touch, really.
Okay, interesting. Going for the trifecta of sensor companies. So a couple of years after leave being at Turk, I think 2 years or so you were there, you then moved to a German sensor manufacturer, SICK. And I'm going to squeeze in as a special bonus a second musical reference for the first time ever, but for you, the younger viewers out there, I'll mention that at that point, we don't talk about Bruno from Disney's Encanto was number one. So that really sort of narrows down the time for me. And hey, that really is an earworm that'll annoy people. So I just couldn't resist. Sorry for hijacking your timeline. We'll talk later about you did a TEDx Harriet Watt talk, and having watched that, and the talk's called Engineering Equity with Automation. You talk about the challenges you face throughout your time working in automation, so across these three companies. And I guess the talk does a good job of highlighting a conflict between succeeding in a business, and that's probably success that be reported in figures and spreadsheets, and that contrasting with a lot of challenges that you're facing and frustration. So, and probably, I guess it led to a change in your career and why we're talking today. So it's probably best if I ask you to try and explain that very strange and convoluted introduction I've tried to give to you. So can you tell us about your time at SICK and then reflect back on your career across these three automation businesses?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So when I was at Turk Banner, I wasn't necessarily focused 100% on mobile automation, which I had been at IFM. I was approached about a role being a specialist returning to my area of expertise, which was solely focused on mobile automation. So joined SICK as a strategic industry manager, looking at the mobile automation sector, and was one of the more experienced people in SICK globally on that, which was good to be able to try and drive the business, not just the UK business, but the wider business forward. And I mean, in terms of sensor companies, all three companies that I joined were second generation German family owned global automation companies. I definitely had a type. I'm not quite sure how that happened, but I definitely did. But without pointing any fingers or naming any names, the whole time I was in automation was difficult for various reasons, which I've talked about in some detail on my TEDx, on various other talks that I've done, but everything from microaggressions, being the only black or the only queer people in a room, person in the room quite frequently, to being told by my line manager that I should have fewer rights because of my sexual orientation, being deliberately segregated from my team because of a disability, being told that the company shouldn't hire disabled people anyway. And being asked what I could have done differently in order not to be discriminated against when raising that with HR and the compliance teams, and then having to, on top of doing my day job, explain why, and teach HR and compliance teams why that's not an appropriate question to ask. It got to the point where those are just a few examples. Staying late in the office and being mistaken for cleaner, quite again, which happened quite a few times, which my white colleagues could not relate to at all. Being stopped by the police several times a year for 10 years because they saw a young black man driving an expensive car. It does chip away at you each time something like that happens. And it got to the point where, after a particularly bad encounter with somebody basically I was pulled into a meeting and told to stop talking about DEI, even though I'd had managed to hit a 5-year target in the previous 12 months and quadrupled the business in my area. So I was clearly doing my job and doing it very well, and also trying to help the business out, working with the global DEI team within the company at the time, helping HR introduce various different practices and rewrite the HR policies. I was told to stop talking about it, and it was that point, that was the straw that broke the camel's back, really, where I thought, okay, enough. I need to be doing more about this. Because, as I said, I've been doing engineering and DEI for a long time, but sort of in parallel. It was at that point that I realized I need to join these two passions, really, and be doing this full time. So within that, sorry.
You're talking about, you've obviously had quite a lot of experience. So it's been a thread for a long time. So you're drawing from a lot of experience. But we're talking about the 2020s here, where you're referring to the challenge of the 2020s. You're not talking about 20 years ago or something. In terms of we're meant to be living in a somewhat more enlightened world than 2 decades ago. So I think that's obviously, I've put a timeline on roles, as we always do with this show, but I think it's very interesting that you're talking about something that is now. It's very contemporary. We're not talking about the bad old days.
And again, just to point out that this wasn't a sudden decision based on one bad meeting. The dissertation topic that I chose was the inclusion of the queer community in the automation space, and that was in 2020. So that was basically halfway through my career in automation that I chose to do that. And the reason for that was based on my own experiences at the time, based also on the fact that for some reason, I still haven't quite figured out why this is, but electrical engineering as a discipline is the least diverse form of engineering you can do, certainly in the UK. And so when I did that research, and I actually won an award for that research, as it happens, I found that the automation engineering sector in particular was much more, you were much more likely to experience discrimination than in other disciplines of engineering or in other sectors. So, for example, a question that I asked within the research that I did was whether people had either experienced or witnessed discrimination based on their sexual orientation or gender identity in the workplace. And I think it was a CIPD piece of research that was done in a non-engineering specific scenario was around 18%. There were a number of other studies that were done by Mark McBride Wright and the Royal Academy of Engineering, specifically within the engineering space, that ranged between 20 and 35%. And for LGBTQ plus people within the automation space, it was 72%. That's more than double what it was within other disciplines of engineering. So it really is, and I don't really know why electrical and automation engineering in particular, but it really, really was a problem. So it wasn't just a rash decision. It'd been building for a long time.
Okay, interesting. So I guess it's a bit of a sad reality in the world we live in now in 2025 with the Donald and various things going on in the world. There's a lot of negativity in how things are viewed, and maybe there's a bit of a pushback even on DEI, so diversity, equity and inclusion topics, and discussion points and almost general conversation seems to be getting a bit more polarized, and how people refer to things and sort of can be quite dismissive. that maybe feeds into, sometimes you hear people sort of go, well, what's the benefits to a business, or times are tough, financially we're restricted, is this something we can look at? So I mean, what would your answers be? What would you sort of coach people or coach businesses in terms of the importance of DEI and the need and the benefits of it for a business?
Well, from a personal side of things, there seems to be this idea that DEI is taking opportunity from one section and giving it to another. This idea that it's um, uh, it's a zero-sum game, that if you have a pie, you're trying to take away part of that from one person and give it to the other, and that's just not the case at all. We're trying to bake a bigger pie for everybody so that everybody can get an equal measure. And when you talk about business benefits, the data just doesn't support that position, that there's no benefit to a business. When you look at productivity, was something that's pretty important in the engineering and manufacturing spaces. Of UK engineers that have been surveyed, over half say that feeling included in an environment makes them more motivated, and that motivation improves their performance. When you look at innovation, again, something that's pretty important for the engineering sector, companies with more diversity have been proven to be more innovative. They have 19% more revenue from new products and services than companies with below average diversity scores. That's pretty significant. In terms of talent, something else that we're struggling with as a sector, is one of the key problems. A survey of engineers, specifically of engineers, revealed that over 4 in 5, 81%, considered diversity an important factor when choosing an employer. So in terms of backfilling positions, yeah, it's really important. And financially, companies that have high levels of gender and ethnic diversity within their executive team are nearly 40% more likely to financially outperform the industry median. These are just a couple of high-level statistics. All of them are search. We can go and look them up. It's not me just making up numbers here. This study shows that it does have a big impact, particularly in an environment like engineering, where engineering is basically problem solving. Well, if you have 10 people around the table, all of whom have the same life experience, how are you going to get different answers, different solutions for something? You need diversity around a table in order to problem solve.
Yeah. So looking at engineers specifically when it comes to diversity, equity and inclusion, can you offer any sort of suggestions alongside the challenges, and what are your thoughts on starting to make improvements topics?
Yeah, I think so. There are a number of key areas that engineering struggles with. Just coming back to that point before, talent shortage being one of them. It was estimated recently that we're short of something like 173,000 jobs, and that is costing the UK economy around £1.5 billion annually because of that. That's clearly an issue that we need to try and solve. Something else that I was saying is an issue is mental health within engineering, manufacturing, construction. Trigger warning here for self-harm and suicide, but it's a commonly known statistic that the biggest killer of men under the age of 50 in the UK is suicide. Something that's less well known is that those who work in engineering, manufacturing, construction are nearly 4 times as likely to take their own life than the national average. That's a massive, massive problem for the sector. Obviously, it's a huge well-being concern, but it's a massive business risk as well for the industry. We've done some research on this at EqualEngineers, a longitudinal study going back to 2019, looking at this. When we did the research initially back in 2019, we found that 1 in 5 respondents said that they had considered self-harm or taking their own life. When we repeated that study in 2022, that number increased from 1 in 5 to 1 in 4 engineers. Now, obviously, within that time period, you had the pandemic, which was a significant thing that happened, across the world. But something that also happened in the pandemic is that talking about well-being and mental health came much more to the forefront. It was something that was a bit more mainstream, not completely destigmatized, but something that people were talking about more. So you would think that people would be more comfortable talking about that with their employers post-pandemic, but actually the research that we didn't show that at all. The same number of people felt comfortable or uncomfortable talking with their employer about stress, about depression post-pandemic than pre-pandemic. So it didn't seem to have any impact on that, which is concerning. So that in terms of key problems, that really those two is something that we need to work on. And as you mentioned, it is an increasingly polarized world. So one of the key things that we try to work on at EqualEngineers is engaging the majority. We do need to realize that the workforce we have is in engineering around 86 to 90% male, and so we need to have them on board. They need to understand what impact this will have for them, and particularly when we're talking about mental health, that is something that would improve with increased inclusion in the workplace.
Yeah, and I think any organization that has a culture that has a problem with inclusion, those problems apply to all sorts of people. Whether you can put them in particular groupings or not groupings, it can be the old white guy in the corner maybe being as
Absolutely
unincluded as others. It's a symptom of a disease in an organization, and a disease.
Absolutely. And a lot of the questions you get when you do this work is basically, what's in it for me, which is a fair question. When we're all busy, engineering involves a lot of deadlines and pressure, so it's understandable for people to think, well, what's in it for me? Well, again, if you feel more included in a workplace, if you feel more open to talk about issues that you have, and again, from the research that we've done, men are much less likely to be open about how they feel and much more likely to internalize. That can then lead to mental health and well-being concerns that has led to things like self-harm and suicide in the workplace. Then that is what it can do. It can help tackle that problem.
Okay. So this particular podcast, I think, primarily addresses an SME audience, and there's always a risk with SMEs that they can view difficult subjects as, oh, well, that's just a big business topic. And a difficult subject can be the introduction of automation, but it could also be DEI. It can be lots of things, and there's a tendency for a lack of resource to delay things, push things off. So can I ask your thoughts really on the issue for SMEs, and I guess particularly if I can ask for any recommendations, any sources of material support. If you were pitching to the SMEs that are probably making up a fair proportion of the people watching this, what would you say to an SME owner or person within an SME?
Yeah, it's interesting that even leaving my old career behind, I still have the same issue of trying to convince SMEs to do something about a particular issue. But no, it's very easy when you think about DEI work in engineering to think about the multi-million-pound projects and initiatives and big companies that have whole teams of people who are paid to do this work. And for SMEs, it's a very different challenge. It's something that, when you work in an SME, as I do now, you very frequently wear multiple different hats and have to do different jobs. What I would say is that companies like EqualEngineers and others like Just Amazing and other companies who do similar work, we are here to work with SMEs. We're here to be able to help with things like best practice and with talent shortage and other policies, strategizing, and all that kind of stuff is what we can help you with. There are a number of SMEs that we work with who do absolutely incredible things. We just had our Engineering Talent Awards a few weeks ago, and at the start of October, where we try to recognise excellence in the engineering, construction, technology space. And one of the areas that we look at specifically is SMEs. And as an example, it was Warren Services in Thetford. Who we worked with on our Skills Bootcamps program when we ran those last year. And they're an SME in the manufacturing industry, but they have done amazing things with mental health first aid training, with solar powers, with sustainability, with working with local schools. And it really is a shining example that it can be done. We're not asking for huge multi-million-pound programs. You really can take really simple steps. Things like looking at your recruitment processes, for example. We have a pathways program within EqualEngineers, we've had something like 500 engineers, nearly 500 engineers go through this program, of which 40% are women and nearly 80% come from minority ethnic backgrounds. Now, for an engineering specific course, having nearly 40% women go through that is incredible. So yeah, that we're doing work here to try and build a diverse talent pool for companies to be able to get talent from, to help tackle the skills gap that we have. And again, but from companies like Primary Engineer doing similar things, and we work with STEMazing, going into schools, primary schools and high schools in Scotland, to get this message across that anybody can go into this sector. So there are companies and resources out there. Come and speak to us and we can help you in that journey.
Okay, I think you've probably given a little bit of a flavour there to answer the next question, really. So I think in the year or so since you've left automation engineering, you've had a very interesting year with plenty going on. I see you've been sort of recognised for the research you've done. You've been a finalist in the National Diversity Award. You've done the TEDx talk, which I mentioned, and I would certainly recommend people watching. And therefore, there'll be a link in the LinkedIn post for this show. And there's it's certainly at the minute it's highlighted on your LinkedIn profile page.
Yeah.
But can I ask you to take us through this past year and some of the things you've done, and also really how your business EqualEngineers has progressed throughout the year? What's happened? Look back and reflect on the crazy 12 months.
It's been a crazy time, really. Joined EqualEngineers on the 1st of June of last year. So had been involved in different parts of the business. We had the Skills Bootcamps program, trying to get more people into engineering, that we run in 5 different sectors across 8 counties in the UK, which was stressful, but it was very rewarding at the same time. There's different parts to EqualEngineers, really. We have the training and consultancy side of things. We have the community side of things with the cross industry networks that we have. So Inter Engineering being the LGBTQ plus network that I also co-chair. We have the event side of things. So we do events such as webinars and podcasts and training sessions across the year. But a big part of what we do, as I mentioned, is the pathways program that we do, and those touch points that we have with the sector, with industry, really, and trying to bridge that gap between industry and academia, and help people make a good start, have a good start in their engineering career. From my side, it's been very interesting, basically restarting my career. I mean, obviously I'm in the same sector, speaking to a lot of the same people, but with a very, very different perspective. And I didn't expect, I mean, if you'd said when I was changing careers that I'd be doing a TEDx talk, or that I'd be a finalist for a National Diversity Award, I wouldn't have believed you. It's a lot of these things just seem to happen, really. It's incredible. It's been hugely rewarding, though. And I mean, from a personal perspective, joining those 2 parallels, those 2 passions that I have of engineering and advocacy for a better place to work in, that it's been a brilliant move for me.
Okay. I remember the vibe of the room last year at the Manufacturing Magazine's Top 100 Awards when you were recognised. So you got that recognition from the engineering community. So can I ask how that sort of felt to get the recognition? And I will also comment that from one sensor guy to another, hey, you got there 19 years earlier than me, so I'm not bitter. But how did you find it? How was it to be recognised by your community?
It was kind of ironic that it took me leaving my technical engineering career in order to be recognised by that industry, really, which I'm not bitter about. I just think it's kind of ironic that, I spent 10 years in automation, with trying to fight against the system a lot of the time, being on paper had a very good career, but and enjoyed the day-to-day job and the problem solving and working with the customers, but a lot of the problems that I had were internally within the organizations. And so to make the decision, to leave, I would argue that I was pushed out of it, really, but to make the decision to leave and then be recognized as part of the top 100 was very, very ironic. But I get, for me, it was validation that that was the right choice for me. That I'm doing what needs to be done, really.
Maybe to spin it a little bit, if the theme of this show is sort of SMEs, maybe it's when you're an SME, you've got more freedom, less time, but
Yes.
somehow
Oh,
more
yeah.
freedom to invest in those kind of things and
Yeah.
therefore get
Yeah.
the recognition.
No, absolutely. And I'd never worked for. I mean, I worked with a lot of SMEs when I was in the automation side of things, but was had big names behind me a lot of the time. So this is the first time I worked for an SME, and yes, it is very different. I would argue when I was at Turk Banner, the division that I managed, the business unit I managed, basically acted like an SME within the business. So that was a similar kind of vibe, but you still had both Turk and Banner's names behind you. So yeah, it is very different working for an SME.
Okay. You've just authored a book called Inclusion Moments. So can you tell us about that? And I guess similar question, but a book. Boy, did you really ever imagine that you'd write a book or do any of this?
No, no, absolutely not. I actually managed to write the book without realizing that I'd written a book as well, which is also, I don't quite know how you accidentally write a book. I've managed to. It ties back in with the National Diversity Awards, really. So I went to a couple of networking events with other finalists, other people who've been nominated this year and in previous years and previous winners. And I got asked about 3 times in the space of 2 weeks by different people whether I'd written a book. To which my answer was no, of course not. I work full time at EqualEngineers. I co-chair Inter-Engineering in my spare time. I'm also doing a doctorate full time whilst working full time, which I wouldn't recommend doing because I don't have any free time at all. So I answered no. But it's something I've never considered doing. But then it was pointed out to me by somebody who was also a finalist in the same category, the NDAs, that in the line of work I'm doing, I'd probably already written most of a book without realizing. And actually, I had. So when I went back, I'd been writing what I'd always called inclusion moments for LinkedIn. So when certain things had happened, I'd written about them, posted about them, and just to try and start a conversation, try and help people see the world from a different perspective, essentially, which I then pulled together and contextualized, and did a bit of. Basically did the extra 10% because 90% of the book was written, and that's now what's being published. No, I never imagined that I would do that, but it's incredible to see. My name in print now. It's yeah, quite surreal, really.
I think I saw a post which was about it coming. So has it now come? Is the baby born? Is it actually on the Amazon listing, or is it about to hit?
It's at time of recording, it hasn't been released yet. I think this goes live on the 1st of November. Is this being released on the Saturday?
It probably will go out the following Saturday. But
Okay.
now
So
you're
it was
exposing the reality of
was
recording.
released then. You can cut that
Obviously,
bit.
we're speaking live to you
It
at
was
whatever time you're
released.
watching this.
We are, of course.
Yeah.
Now it was released on Friday, the 31st of October,
Oh,
available on
fantastic.
Amazon. So yes, please go and have a look. It's been published in paperback and Kindle ebook versions. There will also be a hardcover version coming, and there will be an audio book coming when I can find the time to actually sit down and record it.
I think if you've written a book, the excuse of finding the time, you've probably actually spoiled that excuse. So there's
Yeah.
something to look forward to.
No, I will. I mean, again, from an inclusion side of things, I
Yeah,
I need to make it as available as I can. So I will be doing that version as well.
fantastic. A question I always ask, so apologies, but many of the people, whatever day they watch this live show, many people will be watching it the weekend. It goes out on a Saturday. So can I ask what topics you enjoy talking about to people at the weekend, say in the kitchen at a party, at the pub? So rather than sat in front of the computer talking to somebody on a little
Sure.
screen, what do you talk to real human beings about in real environments?
anything aviation related. I'm still a bit of a geek when it comes to aviation and love traveling. So yeah, different traveling experiences, having lived in a couple of different places as well. That's something that yeah, I'm particularly passionate about. I've got a lot of useless knowledge to trivia. I'm quite good at pub quizzes.
Okay.
Yeah, anything related to kings or queens of the UK, I'm pretty good at. But yeah, I would say traveling, languages, and aviation will probably be top three.
Brilliant. Sounds good. And the other traditional question and the last question is to ask, what have you got planned or what do you hope to achieve in the next 12 months?
I mean, if you'd asked me 12 months ago, I wouldn't have been able to name any of the things that I've done in the past 12 months. So
Sure.
honestly, I've no idea. I want to keep going. I want to keep trying to make a difference. The brilliant thing about this job is seeing the difference that you make in individual people's lives that you touch. And that for me has been incredibly rewarding. So as long as I can keep continuing to do that, then that'll be a job well done for me.
Brilliant. How do people find out more about EqualEngineers and how would they go about following or contacting yourself?
So LinkedIn would probably be the best place. You can visit the EqualEngineers website, but I would say certainly, yeah, I would say LinkedIn. Really, we do also have Circle, so the 7 different cross-industry diversity networks that we have, each have a community on Circle. So feel free to come and join those. We have a whole variety of different online and in-person events throughout the year as well.
Brilliant. Before I sign off and say the usual thanks and stuff, do you have a final sentence, question, observation, or just a thought that you'd like to sign off this episode with?
I suppose the tagline from my TEDx, which keeps on getting quoted back to me, really, that inclusion shouldn't be improvised; it should be engineered. And that I really do truly believe that. You know, we can try and do bits and pieces, but it needs to be designed into a business, not just seen as an add-on or a nice to have.
Yeah. Brilliant. That seems a really good way of wrapping it up. So thanks, Pog, for being a guest. And I will wrap up with the usual boring words. So thanks for that.
Thank you very much.
As promised, the boring small text at the end is to say if you'd like to get in touch with the show, with a comment, a suggestion, or in particular if you'd like to appear in a future episode, please email us at inquiries@MTDCNC. Contact myself, Stuart Whitehead, or Joe Reynolds. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. From me, Mark Weymouth at Plus Automation. Cheers. Have fun.